I'll tell you in a sec what OGP is for those that don't know it. What I'm here today is to talk about a piece of work that has been going on for 8 months now, has involved 100 people and some 20 companies, and will lead to a lot of recommendations regarding our industry. Those will be published in writing in full in May. But I will tell you as much as I can today as where we are heading. And I'll in particular tell you about the lead up so you have a better idea as to whether you intend to pay any attention to the results of this work when it comes. The agenda is straightforward. The prevention and the response part. What is new here is that in my time in the oil industry, and I'm sure you will recognize that, we mainly focus on prevention, and that is the most important. What is different this time is that the industry has had to come to terms with acknowledging that there will be accidents. You just saw the film, and there is a major blowout every year somewhere in the world, and there will continue to be blowouts around the world, despite everything we will be doing. So the new thing is we really have to pay attention to mitigating the accidents. We can't have loss of life to the extent we see. We can't have 3.5 months on American television with oil going into the Gulf of Mexico. We need to contain accidents and avoid loss of life if accidents happen. The OGP stands for the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, and you know, all of the major oil companies are present. The Danish oil companies are members. Kern Energy, Nuke Oil, ExxonMobil. It's a big range. Many national oil companies, not all, and associations is in fact 2 companies only, Schlumberger and Baker Hughes currently. But it's important that there is this spectrum of companies. We work a lot with the national associations, the API in the US, the OLF in Norway, Oil and Gas UK. We also work with the Danish Offshore Operators Association. As you know, it's a small association. But OGP is an international organization, doesn't talk to governments directly. It always goes through national associations. The only government, so to speak, we talk to is the European Commission, and we talk a lot to them. Now, GIRC stands for the Global Industry Response Group. So what happened was that in July last year, the management committee, as the board is called, of OGP, decided that something had to be done on behalf of the industry. We had lost immense trust, public confidence, and our future was gloomy in the sense that the potential regulatory impact was immense of this accident. So the industry had to stand up and show that it took this accident really seriously and saw the need for change. Many of you will recognize this bow tie, as it's called. You know, it's about prevention. On the left-hand side of the bow tie, in the middle you have the event, and on the right-hand side you have the response when you have had the event. You'll see all the familiar names as again. What is new here is that the E&P industry really goes into oil spill response, really goes into containment. This is not where we have spent most of our time. So we cover all things. The focus right now has been drilling. So it's about drilling safety and prevention of drilling accidents. And then it's about containing and responding to oil spills. Now, the key objectives are listed there. as I say, the commitment, demonstrating, first of all, the commitment of the industry to do something new. And then, of course, the product is recommendations, those that will come in May. I will talk more about it and indicate where we're going, but there will be recommendations, there will be an action plan, and there will be a lot of scope for involvement by members of OGP. Everyone that had deep water drilling was invited to be part of the work. Many accepted, some 20 companies were present. Others didn't. There's a new chance if you want to be part of the follow-up in plenum. The first area, the prevention. Nothing new. Review the lessons learned from Macondo and Montara. Montara came in later when we got the report. And come up with plans, recommendations for improvements, and then try and drive this. This is a bit difficult for OGP. As you know, we can only recommend. But there's a desire, a will in the industry to, if you wish, really lean on members on this occasion here. So we'll see how successful that is. Hopefully there will be a lot of acceptance of the recommendations, so the meaning that companies will work themselves. The carbon containment, to be honest, that only was added on when the Americans came up with this billion-dollar project in the Gulf. The problem with carbon containment is that the billion-dollar project in the Gulf works only in the Gulf of Mexico. It has to do with the seabed, it has to do with the currents and so on. There's one in the UK called Osprey, where they essentially have got a copy of the BP cap from Gulf of Mexico. When you look around the world, there are local circumstances that need to be taken into account. I'll say a bit more about it in a sec. Oil spill response, very well established for tankers. 30-year-old technology everywhere. For better or worse, the Macondo accident was a fantastic laboratory. It was chaotic, as you know, from the start, but actually the oil spill response was quite successful at the end. And incidentally, whereas it is well known that we have a difficulty in making agreements in advance about mutual help and so on, it was amazing what happened in Macondo, where BP would pick up the telephone, phone anyone, and 20 minutes later they would have a commitment that people would send ships and chemicals and whatever. So that was amazing. The industry really stood up to the test there. But I can tell you already that the main conclusion from that part is that it would be nice if we could plan a bit better for the next accident. Come back to that as well. Now, all this work is being done in sort of behind closed doors. So it was realized fairly quickly that the communication bit will be vitally important. If these results are not communicated and conveyed and discussions are being held, they will be of much less value than if it is clearly communicated. And here I'm talking about all stakeholders, including regulators and including the public at large as appropriate. There is currently a lot of consultation going on with the regulators, sounding out. The regulators have been on board all the way. There's something called the International Regulators Forum, where OGP has been attending a couple of meetings. So there's been an ongoing dialogue during the work to try and pick up vibes from the regulators. The idea here is that what OGP comes up with should satisfy the needs of the regulators. That's the ideal situation. So that in reality we don't need more regulation, provided we follow this. The organization of the work is shown here. It's already it's following the three topics. The board of OTP is called the Management Committee. The members currently are the usual suspects: Exxon, BP, Shell, Total, ConocoPhillips, Chevron. But we also have Petrobras and Statoil there. The beauty of having such a board is that we have immense resources that we can readily mobilize. But I said 20 companies have been part of this work, so not only just the board companies, 20 companies, including companies like Cairn and BG and others. So it's been a very, very interesting sharing of information, to use Anne's word. Now, 3 areas for the well part, the prevention part: well design, equipment including BOPs, and procedures and management. And if we look a bit more, and this is important, and you will recognize this list: management systems, management of chains, interface between operators and contractors, assurance, competence, the human factor, barrier philosophy, stop work authority. I'm afraid to say that all of these have been found to be highly relevant to the situation we have. None of these are satisfactorily dealt with. And I've seen this since I started in the industry. But that is the conclusion of the work, and it will be reflected in the recommendations. That all these are relevant, none of them are dealt with satisfactorily. The deliverables, it sounds very grand. OTP charter, I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but with some high-level principles, it has to be high-level. I mean, OTP doesn't write regulation. But there will be these recommended practices, and they will tie in with those of the API and standards from ISO and the work in the UK, OSPRAC, as it's called. But there will also be some additional elements in it. So, and all these bullets above will be addressed. It is very exciting for me that this afternoon the program is about very much psychology and the human element, the so-called high reliability organizations. I can tell you already, this is where we have to go as far as the implications of the work we have done. But we will hear more, therefore, this afternoon. I want to show you this map. This is a map of the deep water regions of the world. We decided early on to focus on those regions with, as you can see, more than 300 meters of water depth and actual production going on, and those are the yellow ones. And I can tell you that there's no one solution for all of these regions when it comes to capping and containment in particular. So we will complete the work now. There will be a firm plan for the capping part. There will be a global solution to capping, a capability to cap wells anywhere in the world within a fairly short time, provided you have the right crossover. Containment, all the stuff about vessels and so on, gathering the oil so it doesn't just end out in the ocean, that is much more complicated and will require more work. It's amazing how different mid-ocean conditions are, seabed conditions, the availability of local infrastructure, of vessels, etc. You know, it is really, and as many of you will know, getting stuff through customs in certain parts of the world is a real problem in itself. Oil spill response. There are 2 areas that have turned out to be really important. Dispersants. Dispersants are very contentious in many parts of the world because they're chemicals that go into the sea, but they are vitally important. And one thing that turned out to be really vitally important in Macondo was the use of subsea dispersants. Why? It did probably something to disperse the oil depth, and therefore it was in smaller particles going up. The most important effect was that it prevented the volatile organic components from bubbling up, meaning that people could work at the surface safely rather than being covered up in body cover and with breathing apparatus, plus running the risk of explosions all the time. So this is a realization that this will be vitally important going forward, and it will be a big effort to deal with authorities in various countries to get that accepted. The other thing that came to the fore was in situ burning. That was one of the most successful techniques in Macondo, was to burn, to have booms around the pools and then burn the oil offshore. It's an old technique, but it has sort of largely been forgotten except from Exxon Valdez. And, but again, has come to the fore and needs to be brought into play again. The point at the bottom there of the slide, this goes for everything we do. There's a lot going on in the States, a lot going on in the UK, a lot going on in Norway and elsewhere. And OTP has tried to avoid reinventing the wheel wherever we could just piggyback on the results elsewhere. That's a major challenge, as you know, to not redo stuff. One thing that we have not solved in the industry, or rather the people doing oil spill response, have not solved global cooperation very well. There's something called the Global Response Network, but the reality is that that is not very efficient. So I'm coming back to what I said a moment ago. The key challenge here will be, can we really do something where we are formally prepared much better for a global response or a large regional response in case there's a major spillage in the future. That will require a project that we cannot undertake during this phase. There will be a new project to look at that. So all of this work was announced formally in the EU Commission, in a meeting with the EU Commission on the 14th of July. And getting people together and so on means that the work started in some cases in late August and in most cases in September. And the three streams have been working in parallel, doing most of the basic work up to New Year. But of course, there has been also the need to try and integrate the pieces of work to a degree. For instance, the use of subsea injection of dispersants requires technology related to the capping equipment and so on. So you know, there are links between the streams. The time to agree what are the key conclusions and the recommendations. You can imagine that is a challenge, and that has been going on. And in fact, the truth is it's still in certain areas going on. This is also why we are getting to May before we can have the recommendations out. The communication has started. There is ongoing meetings now around the world with regulators and governments of a consultative, confidential nature. So this is a question of getting the last feedback before we try and conclude, so we get as useful a project as possible. So there's a lot going on. I was in Brussels Monday, and people have been in Brazil recently and are going to Australia and so on. And there will be meetings also in Angola and other important regions for deep water operations. Obviously, authorities will make clear that they are free to do what they want, and of course they are. The hope is that, again, the recommendations will be as useful as possible for the future basis of also regulation. It was Macondo that triggered this initiative. Montara then came in later. But it's important for me to stress that OGP is not the industry council. So we are not in the business of appropriating at saying who did wrong and who did what. This is not the issue here. What happened here was that, of course, the Macondo lessons were studied, Montara likewise. But what also happened in the work groups was that all the other companies that haven't had a recent exposure came forward with incidents that they had had. So the product is not about that somebody did something wrong. The product is the collective discussion and inspiration that has come from all the 20 companies about where they have had an issue. So it's forward-looking. It is very much about what is the thinking that the industry should do, rather than who didn't do what and so on. That's not the business of OGP. Now, you have to take my word for it that these recommendations will enable us to improve the drilling safety, decrease the time it takes to stop a flow, and reduce the impact. Let me give you a few examples. So, one of the main things about the drilling safety is that I said to you that this film is true. There is a blowout every year, sort of, somewhere. But as you all know, it is kept as secret as possible, what happened. We are focusing very much that has to change. We have a very well-working personal safety, personal incident database that has been accepted after many years of working. People are now contributing, willingly, and it is a database that can be sliced in all kinds of ways, and people can learn from it. We can all learn from it. Something along those lines is being worked right now to try and see whether we can do something similar for well control incidents. Because if we don't share the well control incidents, how can we learn? How can we categorically say that 2/3 of the problem is due to human factors, or to BOPs, or to whatever? It's anybody's guess today. We all think we know, but do we? And so this is a major area of follow-up action. I already said that it's clear that whereas capping can be dealt with globally, preparations can be made, stuff can be made that can go on airplanes and so on. That became clear that is an area where we can come up with useful focus. The containment part with the infrastructure and the vessels mobilized and so on is a much more complex issue. There will be action plans for that, but it is a longer-term one. On the oil spill response, I said it already. The two main things is the use of dispersants in general, subsea injection of dispersants in particular, and in situ burning will be important issues. They seem to have very, very, very important impact on our ability to mitigate. Because the thinking here is, as I started by saying, that there will be more blowouts, but we can't have the consequences that we have seen in the past. As an industry, we need to be much more acceptable in the sense that the accidents we have small consequences. This is the main thinking. I think that it's been amazing to be in the middle of world-class experts within their disciplines and see them at work. And it's probably unique in the oil industry's history to have been able to have, for instance, on the cabin containment side, we had 12 people, 4 months in London, living in hotels, coming from Brazil, from Angola, from working the problem of cabin and containment, the best people from the respective companies. It is very, very rare. As a professional, it was fantastic even just to be on the sideline of this work. The hope is that when we come with our recommendations, and there will be follow-up action requiring people, that we will see a similar interest of people, members of OGP, joining this work, and those that are not members, hopefully joining OGP and thus becoming part of the work. Now, at the end of the day, the most important is what will go on in the company, so it is not only what goes on in OGP, but it is a change of approach, a change of gear, you could say, a shift of gear to a higher level, and much more, if you wish, self-policing without the formal authority to be a police. You've seen in the States that they have now created a safety institute. There are no plans to that effect. We don't have that scale that the API has. But clearly the industry needs something to that effect. It doesn't matter who has the accident. It is a big problem for the entire industry whenever there is an accident of those big consequences that we saw in the film. Thank you very much.